everyone. Welcome to the 307th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have stellar, amazing. I feel like I'm running out of adjectives, y'all. People keep telling me that I'm just always excited, and that's terrible. I think they're wrong.
No, that's a good thing.
Exactly. So we have some sort of exciting show for you. Oh, I did it. We're going to be talking about Wi-Fi, so much Wi-Fi, sensors, modules, and we're going to be talking about the Raspberry Pi Pico because it has its own chip. This is a first. We didn't know that when it launched. It's pretty cool. Also, Bosch did their earnings, and they are making some bank on IoT plus AI. We're also going to move into the smart home with news from, rumors about Amazon's plans for a wall-mounted Echo. Fitbit's adding glucose tracking. We've got a big semi deal that is all about the IoT and some fundings in IoT security and edge computing. Plus, this week, we've got Very as our sponsor in both slots, so we'll hear from them twice. And our guest is Bo Woods, who is a security advisor and one of the founders of I Am the Cavalry. He's going to be talking about that water treatment hack in Florida, but he's also going to be talking about how the threats have changed in the last few years for the Internet of Things. So, all of this and more is coming to you in just a moment. First, let's hear from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Very. Are you looking for an IoT development firm that's been there, done that? Very's award-winning team of senior engineers, designers, and data scientists will work with you to get your biggest IoT hardware and software projects fully operational. You can learn more at verypossible.com. That's www.verypossible.com. And I just want to say a big thank you to Very. They are really big supporters of the show, and
they are.
We appreciate that.
We do.
Yeah! Okay, let's move on and talk about Wi-Fi devices. Okay, first up, I have to tell you, I had a dream last night about Wi-Fi. I've been having crazy dreams about edge computing, AT&T, MEX, which is like more edge computing. And last night, I was dreaming like crazy about Wi-Fi.
For the record, you and I have chatted about this, and I think you need to speak to somebody because you are dreaming too much of work and IoT and connected devices.
It does feel a little like that. I'm not going to lie. But that's okay. You know, if you're going to dream about things, maybe Wi-Fi isn't the plan. But Tuya, which is a Chinese IoT stack company platform, they're the underlying platform for lots and lots and lots of devices, including Walmart's Mercury IoT devices, a lot of random, not all Chinese brands, a lot of them are here in the US. They are doing a really good job providing the software for the chips, so the firmware for the chips and the cloud connections, and then the cloud software for IoT devices. And now they are launching a Wi-Fi 6 module. And this is a big deal because I was not expecting this. Were you expecting Wi-Fi 6 modules to come out this soon?
No, I was not. I mean, Wi-Fi 6 momentum is moving quickly, but not for products like this.
Yeah, so we're seeing Wi-Fi 6 happen in routers. And we have been recommending actually since probably 18 months or so that, if you're going to upgrade to a Wi-Fi 6 router. We actually just did a thing about Wi-Fi 6E, which is using additional spectrum. And that actually hit the market for CES this year, and that's not a big deal for the IoT. So 6E, not a big deal for IoT. Wi-Fi 6 does have some IoT advantages. For most people, you're going to be like, hey, it's really super fast connections and better manipulation of antennas to take advantage of the available spectrum. But what it also does is it allows you to connect a lot more devices. It allows those devices to be more efficient when they're routing their packets, which means they won't consume as much power on the edge device, and lowers the response time because of that efficiency in routing packets. So what Tuya is saying is, compared with the Wi-Fi 4 module, they can connect more than 160 IoT devices with an average response time lower than 100 milliseconds. And that's an 8-fold performance increase because of the Wi-Fi 6 capacity and throughput.
And that latency time of 100 milliseconds or less is key at least for devices that you may control and you want things to happen instantly. Lock a door, light a bulb, or turn a bulb off, etc. So that's really key.
Yes. And if you've got like a doorbell or something like that, you're going to have more bandwidth available to it. But really, so latency, the power consumption for your Wi-Fi sensors, there's a bunch coming out. So the power consumption there will be essential. So I was kind of surprised to see this. I was excited to see this, but having a Wi-Fi 6 chip designed for IoT devices, so the sensors, the doorbells, that's crazy and awesome. And I didn't think we'd see that this soon. Obviously, it's just a module. It's going to have to be built into things, which means it's going to be like another year or so until we see it in products. But yeah.
Well, I, for one, cannot wait because, we talked about the latency, but Wi-Fi 6, the speeds, the bandwidth is up to 9.6 gigabits per second. You may not care about that for a little sensor that just sends a small amount of data every so often, but for video doorbells, outside cameras, that's going to enable really, really fast transmission speed, maybe even support, like 4K cameras, because you're going to need quite a bit of bandwidth for that. And it shouldn't impact your overall network with the other devices because you've got all that bandwidth to spread around to all your devices.
Okay. And speaking of Wi-Fi sensors, I have in my hot little hands a new Wi-Fi sensor from Shelley Wi-Fi. We talked about Shelley, I think in the newsletter. I don't know if we talked about it that much on the show, but it's a brand from Europe that is coming into the US with lots of really interesting devices. A lot of them are like modules for behind your electrical outlets or switches that will control your lights. But then they're also launching this Wi-Fi motion sensor, which came out on Wednesday this week. And this is not using Wi-Fi 6. I'm just going to tell you right now. It is using a Silicon Labs Wi-Fi chip that is older generation, Wi-Fi 4, I guess.
It doesn't need fast Wi-Fi. It's a motion sensor.
What? What are you talking about? You want the second motion happens to like go by in ping.
Sure. Okay. From a latency standpoint, but not from a bandwidth standpoint was what I was saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, what? Yeah. No. Anyway. That's okay, because this device is out today, and obviously the 2U Wi-Fi 6 module, which is going to be built on lots of chips. They did not disclose their silicon vendor there. They said they work with lots. Anyway, so this is not Wi-Fi 6, but it is a Wi-Fi sensor. It is roughly $40. It's $39.95, and it is available. I have not tested it thoroughly because I want to check out battery life. What's interesting, though, I'll tell you, is it is a rechargeable battery inside the sensor. And the sensor is big. It is the size of a credit card. So this is not a subtle sensor, as it were. But there's lots of use cases, and people, a lot of people are looking for Wi-Fi sensors as opposed to Z-Wave or Zigbee, which are the general kind of what we've historically dealt with.
And in terms of latency, actually, the company says its response time is under 200 milliseconds, which faster would be better, yes, but that's relatively quick enough for a motion sensor, I think.
Yeah. And when I look for a written review, probably in another week when I can kind of get a little more life into it, I will say starting out, the design is cool in the sense like, hey, it's rechargeable, but it's not cool in the sense that you have to have like a little tiny pin or a paper clip to like get it working.
A SIM card ejector.
Yeah.
I always carry one. Always.
In your wallet?
Yes.
Okay. I'm like, what? Where? Why?
I can't not tell you how many times that has come in handy on my travels.
Okay.
Both for me and for other people. Trust me.
So travel with Kevin because he's got a SIM card ejector.
Well, doesn't everybody?
Well, somewhere in my box with my phone. That's the vote for the next thing we put on a Swiss Army knife. Okay. That's enough about that sensor. Let's talk about the Raspberry Pi Pico, which came out a couple weeks ago. We mentioned it in the newsletter. This is a tiny little Raspberry Pi with a dual-core ARM Cortex-M0 chip. So this, again, so small.
Microcontroller.
And it was very exciting. And it's even more exciting because this week we found out that the Raspberry Pi Foundation actually designed its own chip for this. And they designed it with a lot of attention to the networking so it could perform some basic machine learning. And we're going to actually have Alistair Allen, who is doing the technical documentation and just an all-around chip head who I adore. He's going to come on the show next week to talk about what we're going to do with this, because, y'all know I'm excited about TinyML. But not only is this the first time the Raspberry Pi Foundation has designed their own chip, their other devices used Broadcom chips, for example, but they also are allowing you to port FreeRTOS, Rust, and maybe Zephyr onto the Raspberry Pi Pico, which is great because FreeRTOS and Zephyr are both embedded operating systems, so real-time operating systems used for industrial IoT. So that makes this $4 board like an amazing prototyping tool for people who want to explore ML on tiny microcontrollers, explore any sort of sensor intelligence on this board. I mean, I'm really excited.
Yeah, a couple of things on this. I mean, the fact that it supports FreeRTOS should mean, and I can't say this from experience, but should mean that you can use this board with sensors or whatever and send that data pretty easily up to AWS because AWS supports FreeRTOS.
They bought the guy who developed it. I'm
Bingo.
sorry, they hired the guy who developed it.
Yeah. And while this is not a traditional Raspberry Pi, I want to be very clear because not all Raspberry Pis are alike. This is one of the biggest new exceptions to that rule. You're not running a desktop operating system on this. It's not a little computer. It is, again, a microcontroller, literally 264 kilobytes of RAM, and the chip is only 133 megahertz. So, you're not turning this into a Linux machine to do your browsing and such on. This is specifically for, I would say, the IoT. I love that they did not get away from their roots and that this has a number of GPIO ports that you can use for analog input. So you can connect sensors and data to get information from, for say temperature or, motion, whatever it might be. This is really, really neat for $4.
Yeah. We get a lot of questions from people about building water softeners. A lot of y'all have water softeners and y'all want to track your salt, like how much salt you have in there. And if you combined this with like an ultrasonic sensor and you had like a little machine learning algorithm or just wrote an algorithm that basically said, hey, when it is this distance away, alert me. This is actually something that would do that. You would need to add the radio component, but a Bluetooth radio in this, well, okay, you may not want to do Bluetooth because then your phone has to be by it to pick up this. Oh, see, now we're getting into it.
It gets tricky. But what I will say is whatever you do add to this, you got to watch your power inputs, because if you did put, let's say, a Wi-Fi module, that's going to have to be plugged in probably. But this chip on the board only uses 100 milliwatts of power. You can power this by batteries. They don't say for how long, but I would presume for a long time.
Yeah, it depends on the battery.
That is true.
If I hook this sucker up to my Tesla, we'd never change it. So, moving right along into, we kind of talked about this. I use the words AI anyway, but Bosch, Bosch makes a lot of things. It's a German company, does, sensors, it does industrial equipment, it does power tools. They did their earnings last week and they said that they have sold a bunch of things during the pandemic. These things are connected power tools, home appliances, heating systems, but they added about 300 million euros in revenue by adding artificial intelligence to their product line. So they set up an AIoT. They loved using that nomenclature, but it's AI plus sensors, basically. So their AIoT division, they set it up about 3 years ago. And even though there's the COVID downturn, which has affected their bottom line on their actual products, they have been able to add the 300 million to the top line in the past year because of that division. And they're adding new revenue models. They're basically adding new features, and it's apparently really helped.
Yeah, I don't know what their AI does in the products, but I could see a lot of use cases. But
it's across a lot of things. So they have like 270 people in this division. So like in the appliances world, they're using AI to like add filter notifications to their fridges, right? So and then in power tools, they're actually doing things with like asset tracking and predictive maintenance. So it's a wide variety of things.
My power tools, I end up using the battery and then I don't have the other battery plugged in. Like I would love maybe to even do this to have the tool itself monitor how much battery is left and say, hey, your other battery is not plugged in. You better plug it in now or using this battery. That way you can go seamlessly to transition the batteries out. Just a little notification would be handy. There's a lot of opportunity here.
I mean, there really is. I am very excited about. And Bosch has done a good job of adding intelligence throughout the product. Like it's on the physical devices, like the appliances, but they're also doing things at the sensor level. So just making your sensors smarter so clients can build things using those sensors that are smarter. It's a whole thing. All right. So I was excited to see that. Moving into the smart home, Amazon plans a wall-mounted Echo, according to Bloomberg. And y'all know that I have been adding things to my house to make it smarter, like the infrastructure. So I actually just added a fin. We'll talk about that in a week or two when I start seeing results. But I added a fin water monitoring device. I added a device from a company called Ting that tracks, basically you plug it in, it looks for electrical fires. I have added an Aquanta water heater controller and product. And so what am I saying? I'm saying these
You're
are
really
all
going for the sexy devices there.
Yeah, the unsexy IoT. But what's interesting here, what I'm discovering is my first night in, the Fin was like, we have detected a very weird water thing happening in your house. And they sent me a notification, but my phone was on Do Not Disturb, which is fine. My house wasn't actually flooding. But I was like, you know what I need? I need like a panel. I know, right? I need like the equivalent of a flashing light that's like, hey, these parameters are happening and maybe you should wake up and deal with it. Because if it were really a flood, I'd want to know. And I don't have the fancy fin that shuts off my water for me. So I actually thought this was kind of neat because it would be nice to have like a command center that you could at a glance look and be like, okay, everything's functioning normally.
Yeah, I mean, we rely on our smart displays quite heavily in our house. Even though I have my phone with me all the time, not everybody does. And it's really handy to just see something pop up that, you need to know this right now without looking for your phone or missing a notification. This is actually one of the big downsides of my transition to HomeKit. There's no smart display unless you have an Apple TV and you're watching TV. So Bloomberg is saying that Amazon's working on this. It's 10 or 13 inch diagonally measured. Obviously, you can control smart home devices. It'll have the typical Amazon services, music, videos, video chatting with a camera built in. Should be pretty skinny and thin, unlike some of the smart displays, because this is going to be wall mounted. And Bloomberg says it's could retail for between $200 and $250, maybe by the end of this year. Anything can happen because this is just them hearing from sources. Amazon has no official comment on this. But I think these ecosystems are overdue for something like that. A lot of people use iPads. They mount iPads to their wall and use those. Yeah. So you wouldn't have to do that. And you could use your iPad as an iPad, actually. So.
Ooh. All right. Some news bits. Let's talk about Fitbit.
Yeah, I have been watching news out of Fitbit more so than other wearable device makers, mainly because I want to see the changes as a result of Google acquiring them, which, again, I guess has happened.
I think it's happened. I mean, it totally happened, but then there was like one of the regulatory bodies was like, wait.
Right. Australia didn't sign off. So there could be a fine, but I think Google's like, yeah, that's chump change. We'll pay $400 million. I don't care.
Yeah, they're already fighting with Australia anyway.
Yeah, that's a whole nother issue, but yes, they are. But this week, Fitbit announced that you will be able to track your blood glucose trends in the Fitbit app. And that is awesome to see. One of my students that I take classes with at the community college, she has diabetes, and we built our own little glucose monitor in real-time monitor for one of our projects. And we did that because there's I don't want to say no, but there's few inexpensive off-the-shelf solutions for her and people like her. But this is great. Not everybody who has a Fitbit needs to monitor it, but those who do, I think that's a huge benefit. Fitbit also is rolling out their pulse oximeter readings on the Charge 4 and the Sense ECG in more countries. So if you were in one of the countries that didn't get it, you will have it soon, depending on where you live. Canada, New Zealand, US territories are getting the ECG feature. The Fitbit Charge 4 with its pulse ox readings, that isn't anywhere yet. That's coming soon. That'll be a firmware update.
Okay, and let's talk about chips again. Renesas has agreed to buy Dialog Semiconductor in a deal worth about $5.9 billion. And I think the biggest thing here, this is an IoT deal. They both make, microcontrollers, chips for cars, connectivity, low-level components, and sensors. What we're seeing in the semiconductor world is for decades, it was all about computing, and sensors were like this random side note, right? And what has happened is sensors have become much more important. For example, right now there's a huge issue with trying to buy, the car companies in the world can't buy enough chips for their cars. And so that is slowing down production of new vehicles. It's actually an issue that Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corp is actually working with governments in the US and Europe to try to figure out how to produce more chips. It's crazy. So this deal is all about the focus now, not just on chips for computing, but chips for sensing, because sensing is becoming so essential with the IoT. So yay!
$6 billion they paid.
Well, yeah, they plan to pay $6 billion. I mean, there have been bigger chip deals. So I'm all right. Speaking of money, lots of companies got money. Secure Things, they received $14 million in Series A funding. Kevin, you want to tell us what Secure Things does?
Right. So Secure Things actually creates a platform of services to manage IoT devices. I suspect that's probably more not for home use, but more for large organizations and buildings.
And an IoT security startup, Armis, they received a $125 million funding round. Armis is a fairly mature company. I've talked to them before about security and healthcare. Armis offers companies a subscription-based software that uses network detection. So it looks at the devices on a network and it's watching how they behave. So basically, instead of forcing someone to have to put some sort of agent on every single edge device, Armis is just tracking the whole network and saying, oh, you are doing weird things. Don't do it. They do a lot of the analysis in the cloud. They've been focusing in the last few years more on OT type devices. And I think this is a good move. So additional money for Armis, good. Additional money for Secure Things, also good. And we are also going to be talking about security later on in the show because we haven't talked about the big Florida water treatment hack. So we will talk about that with our guest. So stay tuned for that. But first, it is time for the Internet of Things podcast hotline, which is brought to you now by Infineon. Infineon wants us all to know that they are going to launch a new range of products for the IoT industry at the Embedded Solutions Conference this year on March 1st. The new products will cover sensing, computing, actuating, connecting, and security. That's basically everything. And this is a virtual conference that is going to be packed full of insights for those who care about embedded solutions in action. So you can register now at infineon.com/embeddedworld to discover how Infineon makes the IoT work. All right. Thank you, Infineon. Now, this month on the Internet of Things podcast, we are giving away a $99 smart speaker of your choice. So if you would like to be entered to win, all you have to do is call us at 512-623-7424 and we will enter you. And yeah, you don't even have to have a question, but we'd love it if you have a question because then we could answer it. This week's question comes from Will, and it is about Wi-Fi 6 devices. So let's hear it.
My name is Will Chandler. I live in Bakersfield, California. I've listened to this show for quite a while now. And I have a question about Wi-Fi 6 and its sufficiency to support IoT devices. My question is, does Wi-Fi 6 have sufficient speed, bandwidth, and low latency to support both conventional Wi-Fi devices and IoT devices? The devices that I use right now are routers, printers, computers, tablets, and smartphones. And I expect to use about 8 cameras and about lighting dozens of devices in that area, as well as other switches that indicate open and close of doors, etc. So does Wi-Fi 6 have sufficient bandwidth to support those devices without using an IoT hub that uses the Zigbee or Z-Wave protocols?
So part of the answer to this question actually came up earlier in the show when we talked about that new TUIA Wi-Fi 6 module for IoT, that module can connect up to 160 IoT devices. And again, the average response time or latency was lower than 100 milliseconds. That's specific to the TUIA module, but in general, to answer your question, Will, Wi-Fi 6 can easily handle IoT devices, a large number of them. It's going to depend on which router you have. Some of them may only let you add like 120 devices, some are 150. So you're going to want to check and see how many are supported. If you're going to add Zigbee and Z-Wave, you're going to obviously need a hub, and that hub will be hardwired to your router. So all those types of devices will just get connected through the hub over the Ethernet cable to your network. So you shouldn't have any problems in terms of bandwidth, numbers of devices, latency, etc. In fact, I would even say if you're going to get a new Wi-Fi 6 router, I would consider the Eero products, the newest Eero products, because after testing the Eero Pro 6, I realized it actually has thread capability. And I know that right now you probably don't have any thread devices, but you might in the future. And that would be really handy to have built into your router.
Yes. And I don't really have a lot to add about this. I really do. I'm like, Kevin covered it. And yes, Wi-Fi 6, it's good. That's the new tagline. Wi-Fi 6.
Better than 5. Or they wouldn't call it 6.
All right. Well, that concludes this portion of the show. Remember, if you would like to be entered to win a smart speaker, give us a call at 512-623-7424. And now, stay tuned for a message from our sponsor and then our guest, Beau Woods, who is from I Am the Cavalry. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Very, which is a full-service IoT engineering firm. And today, I'm here with Nate Strong. Nate is the VP of Client Strategy at Very, and he's here to talk to us about the IoT maturity model that Very has developed. So, Nate, can you tell us what the IoT maturity model is?
Sure. Very has been developing superior products for the past 10 years. And in that time, we've seen a lot of different IoT products. This led us to develop a 6-stage model for companies to assess the maturity of their IoT products and understand the complexity that goes into building an IoT product.
All right. So could you break down that maturity model for us?
So stage 1 is embedded devices. This is a regular electronic device that's not connected to the internet. Stage 2 is cloud computing, and that's where we do all the computing processing in the cloud. Stage 3 is where we get to IoT. That's where we combine stages 1 and 2. And the code connects the machines over a network and facilitates the communication. Most products today in the IoT space are in stage 3. Stage 4 is predictive analytics. This is exemplified by predictive maintenance in industrial IoT or recommendation engines in the consumer space. Stage 5 is prescriptive analytics. This is where we add on advanced machine learning to improve UX and really uncover new revenue stream opportunities. And then stage 6 is ubiquitous computing. This is the idea that, for example, you walk into a room and the room understands that you're there and turns the lights to your preferred setting and turns the TV on to your favorite show at that time. It's the idea that you're not going to have to do all the cognitive processing to take care of the little details, that the algorithms will understand what you need when you need them.
And why don't many companies make it to stage 5?
To put it simply, it's because IoT projects are notoriously difficult. Really, the biggest way that this is a problem is what we call the multiple PhD problem. As you build on each of these stages, you're getting more and more complexity in the level of engineering talent that you need, because ultimately you need people to be experts in multiple things. And it's very hard to get people who are multiple PhDs in mechanical engineering and data science. But at Very, what we do is we hire experts and senior engineers in these places and then push them to learn other areas and become experts in other areas throughout their time with us.
That sounds like a lot of fun. So where can people go to learn more about Very and the IoT maturity model?
You can learn more at verypossible.com/Stacy. That's VERY possible.com/STACEY.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Beau Woods, who is a cybersecurity advocate. He is with I Am the Cavalry, and he has his own operation called Strategos Security. Hello, Beau. How are you today?
Hello, I'm great. How are you, Stacey?
I am very excited to speak with you again. We have had many conversations. You've been a guest on the show in the past, and that's actually part of what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about the hack everyone's talking about with the water treatment plant in Florida. We're going to be talking about shifts in IoT security, how we're thinking about it, how the threats might have changed. And we're going to talk about your book, which is coming out this spring. So all of this and more await us. Beau, let's start off with the Oldsmar water treatment hack. For those of y'all who do not know, what happened is on Monday of this week, the sheriff down in Pinellas County gave a press conference in which he talked about some hacker, unidentified as of now, getting access to a water treatment plant operator's computer and changing some settings. And had those settings gone through, it would have poisoned the water supply. But they did not go through. So let's break this down. So Beau, let's talk about what we know so far.
Right. So what we know is mostly from the press conference that we had. And it appears that an unknown adversary gained access to the water treatment facility through an application called TeamViewer. For those who don't know TeamViewer, it's pretty commonly used in large, medium, small organizations to provide remote access connectivity to employees or other workers who are outside of an organization. So when everyone went to remote work last spring, there were a lot of new instances of TeamViewer or remote desktop protocol or some of these other remote connectivity technologies, so that the people who were staying at home and safely social distancing could get back into their workplace and make sure that they're able to get their jobs done. TeamViewer is one of a number of different types of these technologies. And TeamViewer gives complete control over a single workstation. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so somebody's got control over a computer. How does that affect a water treatment plant? And in the past couple of decades, a lot of the critical infrastructure, water treatment facilities, industrial control systems that electrical producers, distributors have modernized. So they've brought some of the older technology, which is slower, in some cases less reliable, and they've computerized it. The computer then connects through their network to physical sensors, switches, control levers, and it's able to allow the operator sitting in a single place to control all of the technology at their fingertips, and to do so in a lot of cases more quickly, more easily, less expensively. So there's a lot of good reasons why you might computerize these water treatment facilities. Unfortunately, if you can access this technology remotely, so can adversaries. With connectivity comes exposure to potentially any of the 7 billion people on the planet.
Okay, so that is how they got in. And then throughout the press conference, though, we did hear that we should not freak out over much because people are not being poisoned, because this was kind of on the IT network, but then the OT network had pH sensors tracking the water. So had the lye been released into the water, they would have tracked the pH rise and would have shut everything down. So this feels like a good design.
So once the adversary got access to the information technology, the IT side of the equation, they were able to change instructions to the OT, the operational technology side, which is what controls the amount of chemicals that are put into the water or the rate of releasing the water into the environment. As the adversary was actually on that IT piece, on the computer, moving the mouse around and clicking things to change values, the operator sitting behind the desk saw this. So they were able to really quickly understand that somebody was getting in who wasn't supposed to have access and was making changes that could have potentially harmed someone. Now, this happened twice, and the operator caught it both times. But if they hadn't, if they had been, away getting coffee or working on a different system, or if it had been in more of an autonomous mode, then there are sensors, backup redundant sensors in that operational technology environment in the water treatment plant that would have alerted the operators to the fact that the pH balance was changing in ways that could be potentially harmful or dangerous if they were not properly controlled. So in this case, that's a really good design. That's one that we recommend, where there's redundancies and backups in the process, where there's things that are offline that are less hackable, that are more securable from that standpoint, where it can provide some additional level of assurance, some additional level of information, awareness, and control to the operators who can then step in and do what they need to do if things get out of hand.
Okay, so how freaked out should we be?
Like Douglas Adams said in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, don't panic. We don't need to be freaked out about this particular instance. Because the operators caught it, because they're now on the lookout for it, because they can take some action, I don't think that this particular situation will happen again at that water treatment facility. However, there have been similar instances at other types of utilities around the world where similar types of things have happened with what appear to be much more capable adversaries. So this remains an issue that we will increasingly face the more we come to rely on and depend on these computerized technologies in order to control the world around us.
And I think this is becoming more relevant. I know that in the last few years, we've seen a lot more industrial hacks. And I don't know if this really counts as an industrial hack because it really feels more like a computer hack on an industrial system, if that makes sense. So when I think of industrial hacks, I'm thinking about attacks against OT networks, which are definitely on the rise. So what are some of the trends that you have seen since, I know you got started with I Am the Cavalry, thinking about, safety for cybersecurity in cars and automotive, and y'all have done a lot there. And you guys then worked on medical devices. I don't know if you've got your next devices that need protection or, trends that are happening that you're kind of keeping an eye on.
Yeah, I'd say each industry, each market or vertical goes through a similar type of process when they start encountering these types of adversaries, whether you're an automotive industry or healthcare industry, utilities like water treatment facility. And so the next set of things that are emerging is always changing. And sometimes certain verticals or certain industries or certain devices leapfrog others. A lot of times it's due to the prevalence of a device availability. So particularly with home IoT devices, we see a lot of security research and adversaries looking at how to leverage those home IoT devices for their own ends. Sometimes it's based on target value. So we've seen in some industrial attacks where adversaries have done it to get outsized control over either a country's economy or geopolitical reasons, or just for a large economic gain. You might want to shut down the operational technology systems at a manufacturing plant and then extort the organization to turn them back on. So a lot of this is driven by the adversaries targeting different industries, targeting different types of devices. And recently we've seen quite a bit of activity in healthcare and in other areas. So one of the trends that we've seen lately with the rise of COVID is particular to ransomware. Criminals or adversary groups will go after an organization like a cold storage facility or manufacturer, like some other manufacturer aligned with vaccine production, manufacturing, distribution, logistics, and they will shut down operations, shut down the operational technology, or make it harder for those organizations to carry out their production runs, or shut off cold storage, for instance, in an attempt to, again, extort financial gain from those organizations because they know how critical that vaccine supply chain is and how much value there is to be gained by going after it, by attacking it.
And we have seen such an increase in ransomware. And I don't know if this is a function of a greater attack surface, like there are more things online, or if there are just a greater number of people pursuing it because of the potential for profit. I don't know if you have a thought there.
Yeah, it's some of both. It's some of
Yes.
the increase in, yes, both of those things are true. So especially during COVID, when we all went home and started working from home, organizations had to open up more work from home, remote capable technologies, and to do so in fairly short order to be able to continue their operations. Putting up IT infrastructure hastily does not often lead to putting it up in a very secure manner. And what we've seen is that where typical ransomware attacks would come in through email in prior years, now it's flipped, and most ransomware comes in through those remote connectivity technologies. So something like TeamViewer or like remote desktop protocol or through a VPN. And so that's really changed things. In addition, because more people are out of work and because there's more attention on it, more groups have gotten into the business of conducting ransomware. And the threshold to get engaged and get involved has dropped dramatically. So in the criminal underground, in the criminal ecosystem, you have different roles for different types of players. So there are some people, some organizations who will just get access to an organization and then sell that access to someone else. There are certain organizations that will deploy malware and execute it and then hand it off up the value chain. So with some of this specialization, it becomes easier to have the capability to do everything needed to have a well-run criminal organization just by outsourcing a lot of the independent components. And so we've seen a lot of increase, particularly in healthcare, of independent access brokers, people who are getting that initial access into an organization and then selling it to the ransomware vendors who may not have the capability to get in. But once someone is in, they can spread their malware wide around the organization and lock down those systems so that the victim company has to determine whether they should pay the ransom and unlock their computers, hopefully quickly, or whether they want to try and rebuild from backups and offline infrastructure and those types of things. It's a difficult choice for those organizations too.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we haven't upgraded our stereotype of a hacker in terms of like ransomware, right? So a lot of us think of like maybe the nation states, yes, and then individuals, but really this has kind of been, I don't know if it's been taken over, but there are actual organizations dedicated to this. And some of them are the same old criminal organizations we've known for decades. They're just getting into new, I guess, lines of work.
Yeah. So most ransomware these days, or most of the widespread ransomware families, are operated by independent groups. These are organized crime groups. In some cases, they'll be no different than the traditional organized crime you think of. In some cases, ransomware and hacking might be the only thing that they do. In other cases, there are some independent individuals or small groups that are less professional, where they really take advantage of that criminal underground ecosystem. In a few rare cases, there are nation states who have deployed ransomware or things that look like ransomware, but don't actually allow you to unlock your systems.
When we first started talking, it felt like, people weren't even thinking about all of the security models for the connected world, right? It was very ad hoc. People weren't necessarily updating their out-of-date Windows computers, for example, or machines that were running Windows that were not actual computers. I feel like we've gotten past some of that. I'm sure that there are still some hospital equipment running like Windows 95 still out there hanging out. But we've also done a lot of work, like many new devices are coming out with, secure enclaves. We're seeing a lot of tokenization. So my device will talk to something securely in the cloud. We're seeing much more encryption. So we're seeing a lot of these stories, but I feel like we've actually made some progress in understanding how to design for a world with larger attack surfaces and more organized attacks against our equipment. Am I crazy?
You're not crazy. So we're seeing advances in our ability to protect systems and our ability to build in IoT defenses. And there's some really, really cool, promising technology on the horizon. There's some really great instantiations and shipping products. And there's in general, I'd say there's a lot more security built into devices today than there were when we first started talking, 3 or 4 years ago about some of this stuff. On the other hand, there's also a lot more new device makers that don't have those lessons learned, that are, starting from scratch, that are trying to just really quickly get an idea out there, built and into people's hands. So not all of those devices will have these increased protections. The great sci-fi author William Gibson is said to have quipped one time, the future is here, it's just not very evenly distributed. And I feel like IoT security is here to some degree. It's just not very evenly distributed, which is what makes initiatives like the UK Code of Practice for IoT security so powerful, or the recent US government improving IoT security in government purchases, because they aim to set a baseline of security that all products will have to meet in order to be considered for purchase or available on the market. And then within that, manufacturers can compete for what's good, better, best, and provide transparency to the buyer so that they can start to truly have market options where they can evaluate security of the different devices, where they can account for true cost and risk, which I'm very hopeful that some of those approaches will raise the bar. At the same time, I'm somewhat concerned that they might not do it quickly enough, because many of these devices might live for 3, 5, 15, 20 years in the field. And so the sooner we have secureable devices on the market, the sooner that we can actually improve our lives in 5, 15, 20 years without having to worry about the security implications, the reliability implications, the ability of adversaries to, at their own pace and on their own time, undermine our way of life and our dependence on those technologies.
I agree. And I will throw out there that the Cybersecurity Improvement Act, while a lot of people are like, oh, it's just for the government buys a lot of devices, y'all. It buys everything from like infusion pumps at VA hospitals to like faucets for bathrooms. So this does have a pretty wide-ranging effect.
So this law has the ability to increase the prevalence of good security capabilities across all devices on the market.
I can't wait. And let's talk about how we can get smarter and improve our thinking about IoT security outside of legislation, outside of scary hacks. You have a book coming out that you've written with several other people who are probably also smart hacking type people. It's called Practical IoT Hacking. It is the definitive guide to attacking the Internet of Things. So tell me a little bit about what the heck I might get out of this book.
When we wrote Practical IoT Hacking, we were really trying to look beyond just the normal types of books that you might get on IoT or even on IoT security. We wanted to break down some of the techniques and approaches to testing IoT so that the technically minded people could go out there and figure out how to more effectively and efficiently understand how the devices work so they can protect their organizations or make changes to the devices if they work for a device manufacturer. So we built in a lot of our techniques and processes and how we go about looking at these things. And we also built in a lot of the rationale, a lot of the philosophy. So why is it a good thing for security researchers to analyze IoT devices? What differences has it already made? What are the legal considerations? Who are some of the people who have medical devices and are security researchers and are actively testing them? Trying to bring a bunch of different perspectives together to frame the issue. We're trying to provide approaches, philosophies, tactics, tools for security researchers to break it down. And then we also wanted to provide some guidance for organizations who are protecting themselves, protecting the IoT devices that they have purchased.
Okay, and I'm scanning through here and I see that you're going to tell me how to hack a microcontroller, how to hack a smart home by jamming wireless alarms, playing back IP camera feeds, and controlling a smart treadmill. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh my gosh, Bo, this is terrifying. Let me just reassure me that everything that you've got in the book, people know about and they're fixed now. Yes?
Everything we have in the book, we took great pains to reach out to the manufacturers to make sure that they were aware of them, that they could push updates and push patches. There shouldn't be anything in here that's a surprise to the companies who provide those devices. And many of these approaches and techniques are already well known and practiced within the ethical hacker, the security researcher community. So there's nothing that should be equipping adversaries. On the other hand, we're breaking new ground in some ways because we're working on new types of technologies. So I believe that this is the first book that's going to be able to talk about things like DICOM, which is a healthcare technology, to talk about some of the MQTT systems that are out there for machine-to-machine communication, to talk about some of the advanced technologies in wireless communication like LoRaWAN. So we're trying to take some of the well-known and established practices and principles, apply them to new technologies, and break it down and make it simple for those who want to get into security research, as well as helpful for those who are already in security research, want to expand their knowledge or have a reference book.
Got it. All right. Well, I look forward to checking this out sometime this spring. It is Practical IoT Hacking. Bo is one of 5 authors on the book. And thank you, Bo, for joining us today.
Thank you, Stacy. It's great.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, if you'd like more IoT news, sign up for my newsletter at stacyoniot.com. We'll see you next week.